Alright guys, Willem here, back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another winner ranking I'm redoing after 5 years, and here we do have my winner ranking for Survivor South Africa. Which, I mean, to be fair, there isn't that much to truly update here. I mean, in the 5 years since I've recorded this video, only 2 seasons have finished airing. Where last time I did it was immediately after Island of Secrets. So there are only 2 more winners to add here. Mind you, I do think there are 2 interesting winners to talk about. And even beyond that, as seen with my Survivor winner ranking, I think there are still a couple different outlooks I do have in assessing winners with it having changed over the last 5 years. So again, I think it'll still be interesting to talk about here. So again, we have 9 winners to rank, where again, I'll be ranking them solely based on the winning game that they played, not them as players. So let's start off at number 9. The worst winning game of Survivor South Africa is still Vanessa from Survivor South Africa, Panama. Again, like, I still dock her quite a bit for being voted out and having to come back into the game. Now, she does get voted out the final 5, which is pretty late into the game. She still obviously survives a lot of the game just naturally, though at the same time, again, we're comparing this against people that survived the entirety of the game without being voted out. So again, the fact that Vanessa was voted out is still a major dock against her. Now, as I mentioned in previous videos, I think in comparison to the other winners that have been voted out and came back, I do think there's more impressive things to call out from her game. I think her final 5 move to take out Gareth is still very impressive, even though it's still pretty misguided in the fact that she's still trying to get to the end of MZ and fails at doing so. In a situation where I feel like she loses against MZ in a final 2, especially if she was going to lay down her sword in the way that she talks about. I also feel like for a lot of the game, she's simply just kind of there with MZ. I don't feel like she's really doing much to actively progress her individual game. I think it's always her maneuvering through the game as a duo with MZ, and again, I think that's an issue. But again, I still think her final 5 move is pretty good, and the fact that she does make it pretty far into the game before getting voted out is still a decent game for someone that had been voted out and came back to the game. But again, in comparison to these other people that haven't, not enough to place her higher than at the bottom here at number 9. Number 8, we're moving on to really the only change in placements between the people that were on the list previously, where this is actually a pretty big drop for this person, where this person dropped 2 spots from the previous list, and that person is Gigi from Survivor South Africa, Santa Carolina. And again, I think a lot of this comes from recontextualization of Gigi's game. I think beforehand, I used to give her a lot of credit for having Ashley Hayden take her to the end and her winning a jury vote against her. I don't think I give her that much credit for that nowadays. Again, I don't really feel like Gigi did a lot of that actively. I feel like Gigi, in terms of a comparison to Survivor US, I think is an even worse version of someone like a Natalie White, who is also relatively low on my winner ranking. I think she's someone that in the end game worked with Ashley Hayden, though even then wasn't integral to any of the decision making. I think a lot of that was on Ashley Hayden, while she also wasn't actively using Ashley in the way that like Natalie was with Russell, where Natalie had this awareness that Russell was going to piss people off and not win at the end. Gigi just simply went to the end of Ashley because they had a better bond than most of the cast, which again is good work on Gigi, good social work, but at the same time, I don't think any of it was proactive in what she was doing. Also, I do think Gigi's game before that is also very rocky. Her first half of the game, she's essentially just on the bottom of her original starting tribe and was probably going to be voted out had they gone to another tribal. Post-merge, she really does nothing to benefit her position, is actually still working with her old alliance despite being on the bottom of it, which again works to her favor by the end as she maintains their jury votes and that essentially gets her to win. But I don't think any of this is active. I don't think she does anything to truly benefit her position in the game, and kind of just lucks out with the fact that her relationship with Ashley was enough to where Ashley wanted to drag her through the game. I personally do feel like I've completely recontextualized Gigi's game since last time I did this video, the where again I really don't give Gigi that much credit for a lot of the things that happen in the game, and even in the final jury vote, I don't really give her much credit for really any of the jury votes she gets either. Where again, the votes that she gets from her old tribe members are simply votes that are given to her because they're her old tribe members, while the votes that she gets from the Ashley side of things are votes that were anti-Ashley and not really due to anything Gigi did, in a position where again I don't think Gigi actively wanted to go to the end of Ashley because she thought Ashley would lose. So again, I just feel like it's just essentially a much worse version of Natalie's game, to where again because of that, for me, I do have Gigi here at number 8. Now number 7, we're moving on to a winner that again I've never been particularly fond of this person's game. However, I do think I've probably gone up on it over time slightly, and that person is Lorette. And again, for me, Lorette is someone that does not play actively either. And really, probably even more so than Gigi, I don't think there is a strategic bone in Lorette's body. I think she is someone that is purely playing off of emotions. She is someone that is making moves based on whether or not she likes a person or what she thinks is morally right in the game. And again, I think that is not great. And I think if I were to assess her as a player, I think she probably is the worst player to win Survivor South Africa. However, that's not what I'm ranking here. I'm ranking her winning game. And I think when ranking her winning game, I do think I've gone up a bit. I do think her winning game is one where, again, she is in the majority for most of the season. I mean, while, again, I don't think she necessarily does a lot of that actively, she does remain the majority alliance, unlike Gigi, who is, again, on the bottom for really the first half of the season. And once she gets to the merge, again, she is in danger at the merge vote, though wins the challenge. Then after that, again, her tribe just simply holds the numbers. And the only time that they don't just follow the pagonging is when she blindsides Angie, which, again, I think is a move that she did purely based on emotional reasons. I think she simply just didn't like Angie and wanted to vote her out, but still, it's like she is in the majority for the entirety of the game. Again, I do have an issue in the fact that she wanted to go to the end of Manla, who I think was a tougher person for her to beat, though at the same time, Manla probably would have given up his game for her. Also, I think her going to the end against Grant was also a bit of a misguided move where Grant almost beats her and seemingly doesn't, simply just because she needed the money more so than her actual gameplay, where I think if you were to just raw count the votes based on who had a better relationship with Grant, who had more respect for Grant, I do think Grant would have won. However, Angie seemed to vote for Lorette simply because she needed the money, which was the determining factor there. So yeah, I think Lorette's game is still a bit of a mess. I don't think it's a particularly good game. However, I do think in comparison to Gigi's, I at least have more respect for Lorette staying in the majority in the entirety of it. And because of that, for me, she's here number 7. Now, number 6, we have probably a bit more of a rocky game than Lorette's, but one that I do think does a bit more actively in the game. And that person is Tom from Survivor South Africa, Philippines, who obviously is notoriously talked about as one of the strangest winners in Survivor history, and usually talked about as one of the worst winners. And again, he's not great, but again, I think in comparison to Lorette, while he's definitely out of the majority at more points than Lorette, I do feel like he is a more active player than Lorette. And I think he positioned himself in the game a lot more actively than Lorette. Now, again, he does have some bad social work at points. I mean, the fact that he's kind of on the bottom of his swap tribe after the Mishka vote, purely because of his own poor social game at that point. Again, that is bad. However, again, I think early on in the game, it is pretty impressive the fact that Sheamus just decides to target Tom because he looks at him as the biggest threat in the game. And despite that, and this big blindside plan coming together, is Tom's initial social bonds that are able to save him there and get the likes of Shanae and Annalise to flip the vote onto Sheamus, which I think is pretty impressive. And for that group to even stick together into going to Rocks at the second round is, again, very impressive on Tom. Now, again, should have gone to Rocks? Probably not. But still, it's I think that does demonstrate a lot of very good social ability very early on, at least. And again, it does crumble afterwards. But again, coming into the merge, I think he plays it pretty well, where despite him being a social pariah in the game, he latches himself to Werner. And while again, I would give Werner a lot of credit for picking up Tom and realizing that he's a number, we still have Tom doing very good work in getting Werner to trust him and get to the point where Werner trusts him more than most of his other alliance members. I mean, Tom ends up being pretty much the only person to truly know about what's going on at the final 5 round. And then he proceeds to blindside Werner at the final 4, and has Jean taking him to the final 2. Again, I think it is a decent game. Again, it is a game where I think there is a lot more active work from Tom. I think there's a lot more good positioning from Tom throughout the game. Yeah, I think there's a lot more good work from Tom across the season than someone like Lorette. Now, again, I could definitely see the argument for Lorette being higher simply because Lorette was in the majority for longer in the game than Tom, who had this massive stint in the late pre-jury where he was out of the majority and was potentially going home if they got into another tribal. But I do think there are more impressive aspects of his game, especially when he just outright wins a jury vote against Sean. It's not like a situation where, again, he wins due to sympathy, or even then it being a close vote where, he wins by a landslide against Sean. And I feel like those aspects of his game are definitely more impressive to me than Lorette's. That's why I do have him here 6. Now, number 5, we're moving on to someone that I've trashed this person's game in the past, and to be honest, I stand by a lot of it still. However, that's just where we're at with Survivor South Africa. Most of the winners here are pretty bad, but at number 5, I do have Nicole Wilmans from Immunity Island, who, again, it's funny that she's this high. She's literally right at the middle of the list, despite how much I really bashed on her game after Immunity Island. But again, I mostly stand by what I said. I do think Nicole Wilmans won in a very fluky way. I mean, she seems to win a final 2 situation where it's really the only final 2 situation she would win. And in a situation where even coming into the final 3 rounds, she was not even the front runner to win that final 2. Where again, with her versus Anella, we have videos from the jury of the jury propping up Anella over Nicole at the time of the Tyson vote, to where again, it is just very jarring, the fact that they just see her vote out Chappies and they instantly change their mind her entire game, which is ridiculous considering obviously Anella would have done the exact same thing. It just was happenstance that Nicole was the one to beat Chappies in immunity. But it seems like that's something that this jury really respected, which is also strange considering how strategy focused this jury was. So I still find that very weird. I still don't understand the overall jury philosophy of this season, as it just feels so opposed to how this season actually played out. And then mixing that in the fact that, again, I do think she was kind of aloof for a lot of the middle game. I do think she was definitely in danger had she not won immunity during the Tide Destinies round. And I think there are definitely nitpicks to have here with Nicole's game. But again, in comparison to the rest of the winners, like, she's not that bad, realistically. I mean, like, the first half of the game is pretty solid. Like, she's with the other women of her starting tribe. She's in a pretty good spot at that point in the game. Obviously, that all crumbles at the merge where they lose control. Again, she does need to win immunity at a point. But really, outside of that one round, like, she's relatively safe moving forward. It's just the fact that she has almost no real control in the game. And again, I still stand by the fact that I would have voted for Anella over Nicole. I do think Anella had a lot more agency in the back half of the game. And while, again, I do think there are issues with that, where I think there are points where he's playing poorly, I still respect the fact that he had that agency. While I feel like Nicole had very little agency in the back portion of the game. But again, I still think her first half of the game is pretty strong. And her last few rounds are solid as well. I think at the point where she teams up with Chappies and takes out the likes of Kieran and Tyson, I think her game there is also pretty solid. So again, it's not an entirely bad game. I think in comparison to Tom, I'd probably argue that Tom had more impressive individual moments than Nicole, but I think Nicole had a more stable game, a game where I think she made less mistakes than Tom. So I feel like for me, again, it is relatively close, but I think I'm giving the edge to Nicole here, so she's here at number 5. Now number 4, and at number 4, we're finally getting a winner that I wouldn't consider a bottom tier winner, but still not a great one in the grand scheme of things either. At number 4, we do have Heike from SA Maldives, who I think is a fine winner here. I mean, I have issues with the overall way he plays the game, where he is this very faux, honor-bound player, despite the fact that he's doing a lot of the same things that most other players are doing. He kind of plays the game in a similar way to how, like, Coach would play the game, which I think is an issue, especially in terms of jury perception on most seasons, that it doesn't really end up coming to bite him on this season. But even beyond that, again, like, it's a very rocky game where his first half of the game is just very bizarre, as he's just constantly in and out of the majority, simply because, like, he's the leader of his own side. However, he does have, like, a working relationship with Tajin, and Tajin ends up playing this part of the game just super weirdly, where he constantly flips back and forth between taking out one of his own numbers and one of Heike's numbers. Like, it's like this thing where, like, he has this working relationship with Tajin that keeps him relatively safe, but through that, Heike also has these, like, wins and losses constantly throughout the pre-merge that I find it very tough to how to assess it. But again, he is relatively safe. Like, despite the amount of times that he doesn't get his way in the pre-merge, he's never being targeted, and there's still other points where he does get his way. So again, it is a bit of a strange thing to assess. But once we get to the merge, again, I think he plays it pretty well. Again, he sticks with the majority until the final 7. He then flips the vote onto Tajin, gets him out there at the final 6. Him and Bonnie are able to use the calories pretty effectively, where that, along with Let's Go's Idol, essentially wins them the entire season, really, where they really just steamroll from that point on. Now, again, I have issues with his final 3 round, where his final 3 round is essentially him giving up and kind of by luck being taken to the end by Let's Go, simply because Let's Go had a poor read on the jury. Again, I do have issues with that. But again, I think it is a mostly solid game. I think his post-merge game outside the final 3 round is pretty strong. However, again, the first half of this game is very rocky. I think his overall game philosophy is one that I don't particularly love, but I think in comparison to most of the other winners of Survivor South Africa, it's not really that close. He's pretty solidly at number 4 here. Now number 3, and now we're finally getting around to talking about the latest winner of the show. Here we do have Dino from Return of the Outcasts. And Dino also plays a game that I have always found very tough to assess. I very much struggle with where to, like, consider him. Is he like a top middle tier winner? Is he a bottom top tier winner? I really don't know. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I think his game is just kind of rocky, though also kind of solid at the same time. Again, it's just a weird game to assess. Again, I think early on, he's in a pretty good spot on his original tribe. He has a wide range of allies from the likes of Pinty and Harissa Teresa from his original season. He also has the likes of Felix and Phil, and we have him leading this blindside against Tevin, which is a pretty impressive move. Again, he is pretty much running things for the pre-jury, but then he gets swapped into a bad position, and despite being on the bottom and like kind of needing his idol at the first swap tribal, he is still able to do pretty good work there and building relations with the likes of Marion and Meryl and Palessa. He obviously has the feud with Dante, though really I feel like that was due to pregame. And really coming into merge, he should be in a pretty bad spot. I mean, he should be on the bottom, where he loses a lot of his potential allies all in a row. He loses Shona, he loses Pinty, he loses Teresa, he loses Palessa. A lot of his allies coming into merge, yet despite that, he's able to reintegrate with the likes of Shane and Marion, while also still having Phil and Felix, and while also still having the likes of Meryl and Paige as potential allies, to where again, he wins the day in his feud with Dante. He obviously pulls off the big blindside against Steffi, which is really impressive work there. And really from that point forward, he ends up working with Shane and Marion, which my initial thought was that this is a dumb move. I don't know why he's flipping against the likes of Felix and Phil unnecessarily. However, it kind of ends up working out for him. I mean, it works out in a way where both Marion and Shane seem very willing to take him to the end. I mean, they obviously stay true to that final 3 deal, really just running their way to the final 3 in a situation where, again, it seems like Shane would have taken Dino to the end. Dino obviously takes Shane to where he wins, meaning that he only needs to beat Marion in final immunity, which is something that's pretty likely in most instances. I think it's a strong game. I think it's a strong game, one that, again, has some rocky moments, and one that has points where, he's not necessarily getting his way, but despite that, he's still able to persevere through that anyway, and still find himself in a pretty good winning position in the game. Again, I actually feel like Dino probably plays a more stable game than the next player we'll be talking about. However, I also feel like he probably has less, full control over the game than the next person we'll be talking about, where, I think Dino plays pretty well from this kind of secondary position where he is a good strategic thinker, he is a good advisor in the game, but he's not really this person that's out in front unless someone has pre-game stigmas against him, where I wouldn't consider him the mastermind of his alliance with him, Shane, and Marion. I would consider that more so Marion, but I do think he was able to use that position to the fullest. So I think overall a pretty solid game, but one that I don't feel like I could put him higher, considering I feel like the other 2 winners were more out in front than him. But again, still pretty good game. He's here at number 3. Now, number 2, we're moving on to the definitive top 2 in my mind, though I think there's a pretty big gap even within that. At number 2, I do have Graham from South Africa Champions. I think Graham plays a very impressive game. I've mentioned this many times in the past. I think he essentially plays a Tony-style game, just in a bit more boring of a way. But again, he instantly flips the game at the first vote, where the likes of Xavion and Cornet seem to be running things early on. He instantly creates a resistance to that and blindsides Ashley from the game, really takes control of his tribe from that point forward, while having this pretty solid core around him. And at the swap, I think he really utilizes the swap to his benefit, building this even stronger relationship with Xavion and securing him as his ally. Also building a deal with Solivel and Boule, keeps him safe during the merge round, where we come into the merge where he is a big target for the minority there. I mean, we do see him kind of almost get idled out of the game, where through Shane's idle play, we do have a tie between him and Marion, where, again, he could have potentially gone home there. I think there was a serious chance that if he had not secured his side together as well as he did, he would have been voted out on the revote. I mean, we literally even see Vel switch her vote to Graham on the revote. So I think that saves him there. But then obviously we have him blindsiding Solly at the following vote. We also have him blindsiding Moira, which I think that's the point in the game where I'm a bit less high on Graham. The fact that, again, he is controlling these votes. He is an extremely dominant player. I don't know if he's dominating the game optimally, to where, again, taking out Moira in the position he does, I feel like was a bit misguided. I mean, Moira is not really a threat in the game. She doesn't really have many other options, and it seems to be taking out Moira simply just due to information Phil told him earlier in the game that, again, doesn't really matter. So I think that's a pretty misguided. But then obviously we have him blindsiding Shane, and then his game really kind of goes off the rails in the end game, where he does lose control simply due to an idle play. Again, an idol that Sifu shouldn't have even had by most other Survivor Series' rules, but Xavion gets taken out there, which, to be fair, I think is a position where it probably would have been Graham had Xavion won immunity. So in a way, he gets kind of lucky there, but also his final round's a bit rocky. And to be honest, even his jury prospects are a little bit rocky, where he does win in a 5-3-2 vote. But if it were not for the likes of Mark and Cornet, who weren't even on the island with them for half the time, and if it wasn't for him flipping Marion at the last second, it would have been a much, much closer vote, where he would barely squeaked. He probably could have potentially lost the game, but again, it's a bit of a rocky game. Again, I think he has a lot of control in the game. He is a very dominant player, again, completely running his original tribe, really just running the game up until the final 5. I think there's not really a point until the final 5 there where he doesn't have control over who's going home at every tribal that he's going to. But again, his tail end of the game is a bit rocky, but again, it's a bit rocky due to an idle play that shouldn't have even been allowed. So again, it's a bit of a strange game to assess, but I think it's still an extremely dominant one. The one that I think can be misguided at points, which is why I do him at 2. And now number 1, the number 1 winner of Survivor South Africa is very easily Rob Bentley from Island of Secrets, who, again, I think plays an extremely dominant game. I think one of the most dominant games in Survivor history. I will say I'm probably a little bit lower on Rob Bentley now than what I used to be in terms of his winning game. It's still extremely impressive, and it is, again, still one of the best of all time. But I think there are things to knock. I think even in comparison to Graham, I think there's things to knock here. I mean, like, he is in control of his original tribe, again, really running things, but then gets put into a bad swap where I think his first swap is actually something that I kind of forgot about, that if they did go to tribal, I do think he probably would have gone home, if not been in a lot of danger there, which is a pretty bad spot for him to be in, especially considering they were in that formation for 3 rounds of the game. But he picks up the pieces at the second swap and ends up leading the charge against Rocco. And really from the merge on, he's really able to dominate the game from that point forward, really leading the charge in pretty much every single vote from that point forward. Though I think my big issue of Rob's end game comes from really all the lead up to the final 5 round, where again, towards the mid game, we do get a lot more talk about taking Rob out eventually by his own allies, to the point where, again, he ends up winning out anyway, though I still do look at his end game as pretty rocky, particularly in the fact that, again, there was a point where he talked about how he would give up his immunity just to make a statement, which is just like, why are you doing that? Which, again, he doesn't follow through with, but again, it's just kind of a dumb notion to even consider to begin with. And I do think there are routes where if he did not win Final 5 immunity, I do think he could have very much been in danger there. And obviously Nicole does flip to his side by the end of it, but I do very much wonder how much of that is based around the fact that Rob was coming off as such a big power player at that point. The fact that he was winning all these challenges and they knew he had an idol, where I wonder if it was Nicole being scared that the move wouldn't go through. And again, I just very much struggle with like my overall assessment of his end game. Now, again, like, it doesn't matter in terms of a South Africa winner ranking. I think no matter what, he's still higher than Graham for the most part. Again, I think Graham's game is probably a bit more stable to the final 5, where Graham was in the majority the entire time and really ran things, while Rob wasn't necessarily in that position simply because of a bad second swap, but even then was pretty lock safe coming into the final 5 round. And again, I do think both Rob and Graham have very rocky end games, but I think Rob probably did more active work in getting himself out of that tricky spot than Graham, where again, I think Rob at least like maintained this relationship with Nicole, that had her eventually flipping back, and really held the numbers through the final 4 round as well, where I feel like Graham is more so having the game being played around him at the very end there. So yeah, I just think as a whole, I think Rob's stranglehold on the game was a bit tighter than Graham's during the points where Rob was in control, and I think probably has a slightly stronger end game than Graham, to where Rob does end up being number 1 on my Survivor South Africa winner ranking. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every winner in Survivor South Africa. Now moving forward, again, I'll be continuing to do these updated videos after 5 years, and just in general expect more of the same style of content from the channel. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.